Wait,
Marina Volkov
if
had
you
been
sign
cleaning
this
office
clause,
buildings for
you
12
lose
years, and in that
everything.
time, she learned to be invisible. People in expensive suits walked past her as if she were part of the furniture, discussing deals worth millions while she emptied their trash cans and wiped down their conference tables. At 43, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun and wearing the standard gray uniform with the yellow cleaning gloves, she'd made peace with her invisibility. She cleaned the executive floors of Sterling Capital at night, after the important people had gone home. The pay was decent enough to support her small apartment and help send money back to her mother in Ukraine. She didn't ask for more than that, but tonight was different. Tonight, she'd been called in for an emergency cleaning during business hours. Someone had spilled an entire carafe of coffee in the main conference room just before a crucial meeting, and the regular day porter was sick. Marina arrived at 7 in the evening, pushing her cart quietly down the hallway. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see them, a dozen executives in tailored suits sitting around the massive table, their attention focused on the man at the head. That was Ethan Sterling, the CEO and founder of Sterling Capital. At 38, he'd built a venture capital empire worth billions. Known for his sharp instincts and aggressive acquisition strategies, Marina had cleaned his office many times, though he'd never once looked at her directly. To him, she was as much a part of the background as the furniture. She slipped into the conference room quietly, hoping to clean up the coffee stains and leave without disturbing them. But as she worked, carefully blotting at the carpet with her cleaning solution, she couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "The Horizon Tech acquisition is ready to close," one of the executives was saying. "All we need is your signature, Mr. Sterling, and we'll own controlling interest in their company. The purchase price is $500 million. Marina glanced up despite herself. On the table in front of Ethan Sterling was a thick contract, and he was poised to sign it. The board members looked excited, eager, already counting their returns. Something made Marina pause. Maybe it was the number mentioned, so impossibly large. Maybe it was the way the executives seemed almost too eager. But her eyes landed on the contract, and she saw the header: Horizon Technologies Acquisition Agreement. Horizon, not Horizon. Marina's English wasn't perfect. She'd come to America 20 years ago and had worked hard to learn the language, but she still struggled sometimes. Yet she knew enough to see that something was wrong. The company they were discussing was Horizon Tech, but the contract said Horizon. She looked closer as she cleaned, her heart beginning to race. The company address was also different. Horizon Tech was based in California. This contract listed an address in Delaware. Marina's hands trembled as she sprayed more cleaner on the carpet. This wasn't her business. She was just the cleaning lady. Who was she to question a room full of wealthy executives and their $500 million deal? But $500 million in the wrong company name. She thought about her mother back in Ukraine. How she'd been cheated out of her small savings by a scammer who'd changed one word in a contract. How devastated her mother had been. How Marina had worked extra shifts for 2 years to help replace that money before she could talk herself out of it. Marina stood up. Her voice came out quiet, almost apologetic. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling." The entire room fell silent. Every head turned to stare at her. She saw surprise on some faces, annoyance on others. The cleaning lady had spoken. The invisible woman had dared to interrupt their important meeting. Ethan Sterling looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "Yes, is there a problem with the cleaning?" Marina's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to speak. "I am sorry to interrupt, but I noticed the contract. It says Horizon with an I. You are talking about Horizon with an O. Different spelling. Different company, maybe?" One of the executives laughed dismissively. "Clearly a typo. We know which company we're buying." Okay. But Ethan Sterling had gone very still. He picked up the contract and looked at it closely for the first time. Marina watched his expression change from irritation to confusion to growing alarm. "This isn't a typo," he said slowly. "This is a completely different company." He flipped through the pages rapidly. "The address is different. The incorporation state is different. The financial statements don't match what we reviewed." The room erupted in chaos. Executives scrambled to pull out their copies of the contract, their faces going pale as they realized what had almost happened. They'd been so focused on the deal itself, so eager to close it, that no one had actually read the final contract carefully. "How did this happen?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp as a blade. "Someone explained to me how we were about to pay $500 million for the wrong company." The lead counsel shuffled through papers with shaking hands. "I don't understand. The previous drafts all said Horizon. This final version must have been altered after our last review." "Get legal on the phone now," Ethan commanded. "I want to know who prepared this final contract and how this change was made. And nobody signs anything until we get to the bottom of this." Marina had backed away, retreating toward her cleaning cart, hoping to disappear again. But Ethan's voice stopped her. "It's you, the cleaning lady? What's your name?" "Marina Volkov, sir," she said quietly. "Marina," Ethan repeated, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You just saved this company $500 million, possibly more, depending on what kind of fraud was being attempted here." The investigation that followed revealed a sophisticated scheme. One of Sterling Capital's trusted outside attorneys had been paid by a shell company to make subtle changes to the final contract. The plan had been to have Sterling unknowingly purchase worthless Horizon Technologies, a nearly bankrupt company with a deliberately similar name, while the real Horizon Tech remained independent. The conspirators would pocket the $500 million and disappear before anyone realized the mistake. It would have worked if Marina hadn't been paying attention. 2 weeks later, Marina was called to Ethan Sterling's office. She'd never been summoned there before, only cleaned it at night when it was empty. She arrived during her evening shift, still in her gray uniform, her cleaning cart waiting in the hallway. Ethan was sitting at his massive desk overlooking the city, but he stood when she entered, which shocked her. "Rich men didn't stand for cleaning ladies." "Volkov, please sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. Marina sat uncomfortably on the edge of the seat, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been learning about you," Ethan said. 12 years with the cleaning company, perfect record, never a complaint, always reliable, always thorough. You came to this country from Ukraine with nothing and built a life through hard work." Marina wasn't sure how to respond, so she said nothing. "I've also learned that you have a degree in accounting from a university in Kyiv," Ethan continued. "But your credentials weren't recognized here, and you ended up in cleaning work instead." "I do not mind the work," Marina said quietly. "It is honest work." "It is honest work," Ethan agreed. "But Ms. Volkov, you noticed a discrepancy in a complex legal document that none of my expensive attorneys caught. You had the courage to speak up in a room full of people who outrank you, knowing you might be ridiculed or ignored. You potentially saved this company from a catastrophic fraud. That kind of attention to detail and integrity is rare." He slid a folder across the desk to her. "I'd like to offer you a position in our financial compliance department. You'd be reviewing contracts, checking for discrepancies, ensuring accuracy in our documentation. The starting salary is $75,000 a year, with full benefits. We'll also provide whatever training or certification you need." Marina stared at the folder, unable to move. $75,000. That was more than 5 times what she made cleaning offices. It was more money than she'd ever imagined earning. "I do not have the right qualifications," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have exactly the qualifications we need," Ethan countered. "You have eyes that actually see what they're looking at, and the courage to speak up when something is wrong. Everything else can be taught." Marina opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a formal job offer, complete with benefits she'd never had before. Health insurance, paid vacation, retirement savings, tuition assistance. "Why?" she asked, looking up at Ethan with tears in her eyes. "Why do you do this for me?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Because you did something remarkable, Ms. Volkov. You saw something wrong. And despite every reason to stay silent, despite knowing you might be laughed at or dismissed, you spoke up anyway. You did it because it was right, not because you expected a reward. That's the kind of person I want working here. That's the kind of person I want to be." Marina wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "In my country, we have a saying, the truth sounds different from different lips. I think nobody listens when cleaning lady speaks the truth. But you listened." "I almost didn't," Ethan admitted. "For about 3 seconds, I was annoyed that you'd interrupted us. Then I actually heard what you were saying, and I'm grateful I did. You taught me something important, Ms. Volkov. You taught me that wisdom can come from unexpected places, and that titles and positions don't determine whose voice matters." Marina accepted the position, and the transformation in her life was immediate and profound. She moved from a cramped studio apartment to a comfortable one-bedroom. She was able to bring her mother from Ukraine to visit for the first time in 10 years. She enrolled in evening classes to get her accounting credentials recognized in the United States. But more than the material improvements, what changed was how people saw her. In her uniform, pushing a cleaning cart, she'd been invisible. Now, in business, casual clothing, sitting in meetings, her voice was heard. The same observations she might have made as a cleaner were taken seriously, coming from someone with a title and a desk. It bothered her sometimes, this unequal treatment. She was the same person with the same skills, but the world treated her differently based on her clothes and her job title. She made a point of always greeting the cleaning staff, learning their names, listening when they spoke. She knew what it was like to be invisible, and she refused to do that to others. 6 months into her new role, Raina discovered another discrepancy, this time in a contract for a $50 million deal. Once again, she was the only person who caught it. This time, it wasn't fraud, just a careless error. But it would have cost Sterling Capital millions. If it had gone through, Ethan called her into his office after she flagged the issue. "You've done it again," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "How do you catch these things that everyone else misses?" "I read every word," Marina said simply. "When I was cleaning, I was invisible, so I learned to see everything. I notice small things, things that change. Most people, they skim, they assume, they trust. I read. It's more than that," Ethan said. "You care. You treat every document like it matters, every detail like it's important. That's not just skill, Ms. Volkov. That's character." Over the next year, Marina's reputation within Sterling Capital grew. She was promoted to Senior Compliance Analyst, then to Director of Contract Review. She built a team, training them in her meticulous methods, teaching them to slow down and actually read what they were looking at. Ethan increasingly sought her opinion on major deals. They developed an unlikely friendship. The former cleaning lady and the billionaire CEO bonded by the night she'd saved his company and by a mutual respect for hard work and integrity. 2 years after that fateful night, Sterling Capital held its annual gala. Marina attended as an honored guest, wearing an elegant dress that her daughter back in Ukraine had helped her pick out over video chat. As she stood in the ballroom, surrounded by the same executives who once hadn't seen her, she felt both pride and a strange sadness for the person she'd been, invisible in her gray uniform. Ethan found her standing alone, looking out at the city lights. "Thinking about something?" he asked. "I am thinking about all the cleaning ladies and janitors and invisible people," Marina said. "How many of them see things, know things, could help, but nobody asks them. How much wisdom we miss because we do not listen to people we think are not important." Ethan nodded slowly. You're right. I've been thinking about that a lot since you came into that conference room. We're launching a new initiative next quarter. Any employee at any level can submit observations or concerns directly to executive leadership. We're calling it the Marina Initiative. Marina looked at him in shock. You cannot name it after me. Why not? You're the one who showed us that everyone's eyes and voice matter. You changed how this company operates, Marina. You changed how I think about leadership and whose perspective matters. That deserves to be recognized. He raised his glass to Marina Volkov, the woman who taught a room full of executives that sometimes the most important voice in the room is the one you're not expecting to hear. Years later, when Marina became vice president of operations at Sterling Capital, when her daughter graduated from university, when her mother was able to live out her final years in comfort, Marina sometimes thought back to that night in the conference room. She thought about the moment she'd almost stayed silent, almost convinced herself that it wasn't her place to speak up, and she thought about all the other moments in her life, in the lives of others, when important truths went unspoken because the person who knew them didn't think they had the right to speak. She made it her mission to change that, to create spaces where everyone's observations mattered, regardless of their position or title. She never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, and she used her position to make sure others were seen. She hired people who'd been overlooked, gave chances to those who'd been dismissed, listened to voices that others ignored. She built a department known throughout the industry for its rigor and its diversity, for the way it valued insight over credentials and character over pedigree. And sometimes, late at night, when she was working alone in her corner office, Marina would think about the young woman in the gray uniform who'd once cleaned this very room. She'd think about how close she'd come to saying nothing, how different her life would be if she'd stayed silent. Then she'd remember her mother's words from childhood. Speak the truth. Even if your voice shakes. Her voice had shaken that night in the conference room, but she'd spoken anyway. And in speaking, she changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who would come after her, who would be heard because she'd proven that wisdom can come from anywhere, and truth doesn't care about your title or your uniform. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of courage, justice, and the power of speaking up. Leave a comment below about a time when you witnessed someone being overlooked or dismissed, or when you found the courage to speak truth to power. Share your thoughts on how we can create workplaces and communities where everyone's voice matters, regardless of their position. Remember, you never know whose insight might save the day, whose observation might prevent disaster. The most important thing isn't where wisdom comes from. It's whether we're humble enough to listen when it arrives in an unexpected package, spoken by an unexpected voice.